My name is Naomi Whitlock, and I am 34 years old. 7 years ago, my older sister sat in our parents' kitchen on a Saturday afternoon and told them, with practiced concern in her voice, that I had been quietly dismissed from medical school for falsifying patient records during my third-year rotations. None of it was true. Not a single syllable of it was true. But that one calmly delivered conversation, conducted over a cup of coffee while our mother packed away the Christmas dishes, cost me my entire family. They stopped picking up when I called. They sent my emails to a folder my father had created and labeled, in a moment I would not fully understand for years, "Do not engage." They were not at my white coat ceremony. They were not at my residency graduation. They were not at my wedding. For 7 years, I was no one's daughter. And then, 8 weeks ago, on a Thursday night in February, my sister was carried through the ambulance bay of my hospital, unconscious, with a hemoglobin that had dropped to a number that made the lab technician call upstairs to confirm she was reading it correctly. The on-call attending in trauma that night was me. When my mother walked into the surgical waiting area and saw the name printed on the schedule taped to the wall by the receptionist's desk, she set down her purse, leaned her forehead against the cold glass partition, and stayed there until a nurse pulled her gently into a chair. Before we go any further, tap that like button, subscribe if this is your first time here, and tell me, in the comments below, the city or town you're listening from tonight, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to Cleveland, Ohio, to the long summer of 2016, and the one afternoon of my entire childhood when my father, Richard Whitlock, looked at me as if he had only just realized I lived in the house with him. The Whitlock family, as it was presented to the world, consisted of 4 people. My parents, Richard and Patricia Whitlock, my older sister Vanessa, and me. Anyone who met us at a party, anyone who saw our Christmas card, anyone who watched my mother set the table at Thanksgiving would have told you that we were 4 people. The truth is that we were 3. My sister Vanessa is 5 years older than me. She was, by any honest measure, my parents' only child. I was the second daughter, the way some couples have a second car. Functional, occasionally useful. Not the one anyone took out on a Saturday night to show off. Vanessa came out of the womb performing. By the time she was 6, she had been featured in a children's catalog for a local department store. By the time she was 10, she had been cast in a regional commercial for a chain of dental practices. By the time she was 14, she was attending a private school in Shaker Heights on a partial scholarship our parents stretched themselves to cover, while I attended the public middle school 5 blocks from our house. The math of the family budget had been done before I was born, and the family budget had been allocated. There was a star, and there was a backup. I was the backup. I knew it the way kids know the temperature of a room. You don't sit down and calculate it. You just walk in and feel it on your skin. My father, Richard, was the regional director of a mid-size insurance brokerage. He was a tall, slow-moving, slow-speaking man who valued 2 things in this world above all others. He valued being respected at the country club, and he valued his daughters not making him look foolish in front of other men. Vanessa, for her entire upbringing, accomplished both of these things effortlessly. She charmed his colleagues. She remembered the names of his clients' wives. She knew exactly how to be the kind of daughter who, when introduced at a corporate dinner, made other men nod approvingly at my father and say things like, "Well done, Rich, well done." I, on the other hand, was the daughter who, at age 9, corrected my father's boss on a fact about the Cleveland Indians lineup. I was the daughter who, at age 12, asked the visiting pastor at Thanksgiving dinner what the historical evidence was for the resurrection. I was, in the words of my father, used in a sentence I overheard from the next room when I was 13. a strange kid. He had said it to my mother. He had not said it unkindly. He had said it the way you say it about a thing you have given up on understanding. My mother, Patricia, was a part-time receptionist at an obstetrician's office. She loved both of her daughters in the way I imagine most mothers love their children, the same way, equally. But she had married a man who had a clear preference, and she had decided, somewhere very early in their marriage, that the price of disagreeing with him on family matters was higher than she could pay. She did not advocate for me. She did not fight for me at school events. She did not, when I was sent to my room as the older sister got to stay up watching television in the den, say anything other than, "Your father has decided." She loved me. She just loved me silently, and her silence, in our family's accounting, came out the same as absence. There is a small story I keep coming back to. When I was 11, I won the regional junior science fair for projects in the life sciences category. There were 47 students entered. I came in first. My project had been on the electrical conduction system of the human heart, complete with a working model I had built out of a kit and a poster I had spent 3 weekends drawing by hand. The award ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon at the convention center downtown. The same Saturday afternoon, Vanessa had a regional pageant, semifinals. There was never any question which event my parents would attend. My grandmother Helen, my father's mother, drove me to the science fair and sat in the second row of the auditorium and clapped so hard her hands turned red. She was the only person from my family who came. She had brought me a small bouquet of carnations, which she had picked up at the grocery store on the way, and which she handed to me in the parking lot afterward, while we waited for my father, who was supposed to be picking us up, but who had texted that he was running late because the pageant had gone long. He never got out of the car when he arrived. He pulled into the loading zone, rolled down the passenger window, and said, "Hop in, Naomi. Your sister was magnificent." That was the entire transition. From the moment my name had been announced in the auditorium to the moment I sat down in the passenger seat with a trophy on my lap and a manila envelope on the floorboards, no one in my immediate family ever asked me what my project had been about, what category I had won in, or what the deciding question had been when I had advanced past the second round. My grandmother had asked all of those things. She had also asked, with a small smile, if I might one day be a doctor. I had told her I thought I would. She had nodded once, very slowly, and said, "Good." She died of a stroke 6 months later, before she ever got to see whether the answer would turn out to be true. The deciding question, by the way, in the second round of the regional science fair, had been about a heart condition called atrial fibrillation. I have thought about that question a lot over the years, because the answer had to do with how the heart's electrical signals can become disorganized, beating in chaotic, uncoordinated patterns that look, on an EKG, like noise. The heart is still alive. The heart is still trying, but the signals are no longer reaching the parts of the body that need to hear them. I have thought about that as a metaphor for my entire family of origin. The signals were always being sent. They were never reaching anyone who could read them. I told myself through middle school and high school that I did not need their attention. I told myself my plans were bigger than the size of their interest. I poured everything I had into school. I joined the debate team. I worked a part-time job at a hospital gift shop my junior year because the hospital was the only building in Cleveland where I felt completely at ease, and I would have paid them to let me stand near it. I volunteered at a free clinic on Saturdays, starting at 16. By the time I was a senior, my unspoken theory of life was that if I could not be the daughter my parents noticed, I would be the daughter they could not look away from. For one afternoon in the spring of my 18th year, I almost succeeded. The acceptance letter from Duke University's School of Medicine arrived on a Wednesday in late March. I had applied to 9 medical schools. I had been accepted to 6. The thickest envelope of the 6, the one I had been most afraid to open and had carried unopened in my backpack for 2 full days, was from Duke. Full ride. 800 miles south of Cleveland. My father read the letter at the kitchen counter that evening, leaning on his elbows in his work shirt, the sleeves rolled up to the forearms. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the granite, and he looked up at me, and he said, with a kind of stunned slowness that I had not heard in his voice since I was small enough to sit on his shoulders, "Naomi, I am proud of you." I've replayed those 4 words 10,000 times. I have replayed the precise tilt of his chin when he said them. I have replayed the small sound my mother made in the doorway of the kitchen when she heard him. I have replayed Vanessa's face at the kitchen table, where she had been picking at a plate of pasta and pretending to scroll on her phone. My mother called my father's sister, my Aunt Maureen, that night. I heard her in the den. She said, "Maureen, you will not believe it. Duke, they are paying for everything. She did it." Her voice, when she said it, had a quality I had never heard from her before, not directed at me. Pride. Open pride. Specific pride. The kind of pride that contains the name of the person it is about. For about 4 hours on a Wednesday in March of 2016, I was the daughter my parents had not realized they had. And Vanessa, who was sitting across the kitchen island with a glass of wine she had poured for herself without asking permission, who was 23.5 years old, who was working as an assistant buyer at a boutique department store in Chicago, who had been telling everyone at the family Christmas the previous winter that her career was about to take off and that we should all watch this space, Vanessa was already doing arithmetic. I did not see her doing it. I saw a sister who put her wine down, walked around the kitchen island, and hugged me hard. I saw a sister who said, with what looked like genuine emotion welling up in her eyes, "Naomi, my little sister, I always knew you were the smart one. I am so proud of you." I had heard her use the phrase, "the smart one," maybe twice in my entire life. It had usually been said with the particular intonation that turned it into an insult. But that evening, in our parents' kitchen, in the brief weather of my father's approval, it sounded different. It sounded warm. I believed it. I would believe variations of it for the next 2.5 years. She started calling me. That was the first sign. In the spring of my senior year, leading up to graduation, she called me at least once a week, sometimes twice. Long calls, 45-minute calls. She asked about the cities I was choosing between for school. She asked which dorms or apartments I was looking at. She asked, when I had picked Durham, about my orientation schedule. She asked which classmates I had connected with online before we had even moved into our housing. She asked me to send her a list of my professors. She remembered every name. She would mention them weeks later. "How is Maya? How is your classmate from Phoenix? How is your anatomy lab partner?" I thought my sister was finally taking an interest. I thought medical school had broken through a wall I had assumed was permanent. I thought, with a touching kind of late childhood innocence, that being accomplished had finally made me visible to her. I was, of course, drawing her a map. I was naming the rooms and labeling the exits. I was identifying which witnesses she would, 4 years later, choose to ignore, and which ones she would later try to discredit. She was constructing a profile of my life 800 miles south, and I was the one feeding her the materials. I signed every page of it with a grateful smile, because I was 22 years old and lonely, and I had never had a sister who acted like a sister, and I did not want to look this gift too closely in the mouth. The third year of medical school is where the foundation cracked. By the start of third year, I had a person in my life named Maya Becker. Maya was in my class. She was 26. She had grown up in 2 foster homes in southern Ohio after her mother had died of a methadone overdose when Maya was 7. She had no living family that she knew of. She had put herself through undergrad at the University of Cincinnati on a combination of Pell Grants, restaurant work, and what she called, with a small, wry smile, the kindness of professors. She was the brightest person I had ever met. She was also the kindest. The first time I told her, late in our anatomy block during first year, about the climate of my own family, she did not respond with sympathy. She did not respond with outrage. She listened to the entire story, watching me carefully, and when I was finished, she said only, "All right, Whitlock, pass me the femur. Quiz me on the muscle attachments." She knew, the way only people without families know, that some kinds of pain are made worse by being named out loud. We had been roommates since the start of our second year, in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a brick building 7 blocks from the medical center. In the August before our third year started, Maya began to feel tired in a way that was different from medical school tired. By late August, she had bruising up and down her shins that she could not explain. By the first week of September, she had a fever she could not shake. By the second week of September, she was in the emergency room of our teaching hospital with a complete blood count that made the hematology fellow on call her attending in. By the end of the third week of September, she had a diagnosis: acute myeloid leukemia, with a high-risk cytogenetic profile. Her hematologist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Imeda, who had been at Duke for almost 20 years, sat down with both of us in a small consultation room and laid out the road. Induction chemotherapy, consolidation, possible bone marrow transplant. Dr. Imeda did not soften her language. She did not pretend. She used the phrase guarded prognosis 3 times during a 40-minute conversation. She gave us a folder with materials. She gave us her direct cell phone number. She walked us to the elevator at the end and stood there until the doors closed. I sat in the office of our Associate Dean for Student Affairs the next morning. I explained the situation. Maya had no family. She had named me the previous spring as her emergency contact and her medical proxy in a small, notarized document we had laughed about at the time as the kind of paperwork 2 25-year-olds in medical school sign when they have nothing else to do on a Saturday afternoon. I asked for a formal leave of absence to be her caregiver through the next year of treatment. The associate dean, a man named Dr. Linkfist, who had a reputation for being unsentimental and intimidating, but who I had always found, in the few times I had spoken with him, to be more decent than the rumors suggested, looked at me over his reading glasses for a long moment. He said, "Miss Whitlock, this will not be held against you in any way. You take the time you need. The school will hold your spot. Go take care of your friend." He had me sign 3 pieces of paperwork. He had the registrar stamp them. He gave me a copy in a manila folder. He told me to call him directly if anything changed at any hour, and he wrote his cell phone number on the top of the folder in green pen. He walked me to the door of his office. He shook my hand. I have thought about that handshake, in the years since, more times than I can count, because it was the last, truly uncomplicated piece of kindness I would receive from anyone for a long time. I moved into the 2nd bedroom of Maya's apartment that weekend. I drove her to chemotherapy at 6 in the morning, 3 mornings a week. I held her hair back over the toilet for hours on end during the rough afternoons that followed. I held her hand on the oncology floor at 2 a.m. when the mucositis got so bad she could not speak. I learned, in those months, a thing about the difference between caring for someone who is sick and caring for someone who is dying. Caring for the sick is exhausting. Caring for the dying is something else. Caring for the dying is the only job I have ever done in my entire life that asked for everything I had and then asked for a little more. Sometime in the first week of November, I called Vanessa. I am not entirely sure, looking back, why I did. I think it was that something terrible was happening in my life, and I wanted to tell at least one person in my biological family that it was happening. And Vanessa had spent the previous 2 years performing a version of sisterhood that I had believed was real. I told her about Maya. I told her about the diagnosis. I told her about the leave of absence. I told her my plan was to return in the spring or the summer, depending on how things went. Vanessa, on that phone call, was perfect. She was warm. She asked the right questions. She used the right pauses. She said, "Naomi, honey, take as much time as you need. I am so sorry. Don't worry about Mom and Dad. I will not breathe a word. They would just worry about you. Focus on Maya. Send her my love." 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, she sat down in our parents' kitchen in Cleveland with a printed-out document she had assembled, and she told them that I had been forced out of medical school. I would not learn the full structure of what she had built until almost 7 years later, in a leather folder on a lounge table in an ICU on the 8th floor of Ashford Memorial Hospital, with my aunt holding my mother's hand. But the first wave of the impact reached my life that same Saturday evening at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time. I was sitting in the recliner next to Maya's hospital bed. She had been admitted that afternoon for neutropenic fever. My phone vibrated on the windowsill. The screen lit up with the word, "Dad." My father, Richard Whitlock, had not called me of his own initiative, with no other prompt, in more than 2 years. I answered. His voice on the other end was not loud. It was not angry. It was something I had never heard from him before. It was flat. It was the voice of a man reading a verdict. He said, "Naomi, your sister came to see us this afternoon. She showed us everything. The patient records you falsified. The disciplinary letter. The boyfriend. The pills. Your mother and I are not going to play this game with you for 1 more minute. Do not call this house. Do not come back to this house. Do not contact us again until you are ready to come to us with the truth." I stood up out of the recliner. I walked into the hallway outside Maya's room because I did not want her to wake up and hear this, and because I needed a wall to lean against. I said, "Dad, whatever she showed you, it is not real. I am on a documented leave of absence. I am taking care of a friend in the hospital. She has acute leukemia. I can send you the leave paperwork. I can send you my dean's direct cell phone number. He gave it to me on the day I requested the leave. He will pick up at any hour. Please, please, just let me send it." He said, "Vanessa said you would say exactly this. She said you would have everything prepared. She said you would offer to send documents." My mother got on the line then. She had been crying. I could hear it in the first inhale before she spoke. She said, "Naomi, how could you do this? How could you lie to us this long? How could you do this to your father?" I said, Mom, please, I am standing in a hospital. I am not lying. Please, please, just open one PDF. She said, I don't want any more pieces of paper from you, Naomi. I want my daughter to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. I want you to come home and stop performing. The line went dead. I stood in that hallway for I do not know how long. There was a fire safety diagram on the wall opposite me, and I read it 3 times without taking in any of the information. I do not remember walking back into Maya's room. I do not remember sitting down. I do, very clearly, remember my phone lighting up at 10:14 p.m. with a text from Vanessa. It said, and I am quoting it exactly because the wording is something I will carry to the end of my life. I am so sorry, little sis. I couldn't carry the secret any longer. I love you so much. Please, please get the help you deserve. We are all here for you when you are ready. She had signed it with a single red heart. She had used the phrase little sis, which she had not used in any text message to me in over a decade, because she knew it would land in our mother's text thread, and she knew that some afternoon in the weeks that followed, my mother would scroll up and reread it and use it as evidence of how much my sister loved me, even when I had pushed her away. That message did not just lie about me. It performed concern. It performed grief. It performed sisterhood. It locked the trap and walked away with the key. What followed, over the next 9 days, was the most determined and the most futile effort of my life. I called my father 21 times. The first 5 went to voicemail. The 6th was answered for 2 seconds before he hung up. The 7th, his number had been blocked. My mother blocked me the next morning. I sent 5 emails over those 9 days. The 4th was 11 paragraphs long. I attached the PDF of my leave of absence form, signed by Dr. Linkvist and stamped by the registrar. I attached a letter from Maya's hematologist confirming I was her listed caregiver. I attached a single photograph of Maya in the hospital bed with her port visible because I wanted my mother to see her face. None of the emails received a response. I would learn, years later, that my father had created a folder in his email client called Do Not Engage and had set a rule to send anything from my address directly into it without notification. He had shown me that folder, when I asked him for it, at the kitchen table in Cleveland on a Saturday afternoon in March of this year. He had cried while he showed it to me. He had said he did not remember choosing those particular 3 words. He had said it had felt, at the time, like a calm administrative decision. I wrote a handwritten letter on the 7th day. I mailed it priority overnight from a UPS store on Irwin Road in Durham. It came back to me 4 days later. The envelope was unopened. My mother's handwriting was on the front of it in black pen. Return to sender. Addressee unknown. We had grown up in that house. They had lived in it for 26 years. I called my Aunt Maureen, my mother's older sister, the only person in my extended family who had ever, in my entire conscious memory, looked at me and seen something other than the second daughter. Aunt Maureen called my parents that same evening. She got my father. He hung up on her within 90 seconds. She called me back, breathing hard, and said, "Naomi Bear, I am so sorry. Your father told me to stay out of his marriage. He told me Vanessa had brought evidence. He told me that I had always been too soft on you and that I was making it worse." She said, "Sweetheart, I am going to keep trying, but you have to understand. Your father has decided what he wants this to be. I do not yet have a lever long enough to move him." She would not have one for almost 7 years. On the 9th day, I stopped calling. I stopped writing. I did not stop because I had given up on my parents. I stopped because I had finally understood, sitting on the floor of the hallway outside Maya's hospital room at 4 a.m, with my back against the wall and the cleaning cart going past, that what was happening was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding can be cleared up with information. What was happening could not be cleared up with information because the people involved did not, in their hearts, want to know information that contradicted what they had decided to believe. Vanessa had not invented their willingness to disbelieve me. She had only handed them a permission slip. They had been waiting for a permission slip for 23 years. The permission slip had finally arrived in their kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, and they had signed it before the coffee got cold. Maya died on the morning of January 11th. It was a Wednesday. The light through the window of her hospice room was the kind of pale blue, undecided winter light that North Carolina gives you when it cannot make up its mind whether to be the South or not. She had not been conscious for almost 3 days. The monitor had been turned to silent because she had asked, in October, that no one in the room with her at the end have to listen to that sound. I was holding her left hand. The nurse on shift was a woman named Doreen, who had been with us, off and on, for almost 2 months. Doreen saw Maya stop breathing before I did. She did not say anything. She just walked over, very quietly, and put her hand on my shoulder. We sat together for almost half an hour before either of us called the on-call doctor. There was no one to call. The phone calls that should have been hard, the ones to other family members, the ones to friends in other cities, the ones to a sister or a brother, none of those calls needed to be made. Maya had been her own next of kin, and now there was no kin at all. I organized a funeral. 9 people came. A former foster sister of Maya's named Tara, who had driven up from Charleston. 5 of our medical school classmates. Dr. Imeda. Doreen, who had come on her day off. And, in the back row, sitting alone in a folding chair he had pulled up himself, Dr. Lindquist. He had taken a Tuesday off from his deanship and driven to a chapel in Durham for the funeral of a student he had met only once. He did not stay long. He left before the small luncheon afterward. But he had been there. I would not forget that. I stood at the front of a small, non-denominational chapel, and I read a eulogy I had written sitting on the kitchen floor of Maya's apartment at 3 a.m. the night before, because the kitchen floor was the only place in the apartment that did not still hold some specific trace of her. I did not cry during the eulogy. I had no more crying available to me. I had spent it. That night, I sat on the floor of Maya's bedroom, which had been our bedroom, surrounded by her things, none of which I legally owned, and all of which she had willed to me in a 4-page document she had signed in a notary's office the previous summer, before she had even known she was sick. She had been a planner. She had paid her own funeral in advance, in cash, at a small funeral home in Greensboro that she had visited alone in July. She had paid the rent on the apartment through August. She had set me up. She had been setting me up for the worst possible outcome since the day she had felt the first inexplicable bruise on her shin. She had also left, on her dresser, a single sealed envelope. I have it framed now, in my office at the hospital. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in her careful, slightly shaky cursive. It said, "Naomi, go back. Finish. Become the doctor I was not going to get to be. And the next time you are tempted to quit because of those people in Cleveland, I want you to remember this. Blood is not what makes a family. Showing up is what makes a family. You have shown up for me every day for 14 months. That is the entire job. That is the whole game. You already know how to be family. The rest is just paperwork. Love, M. I read that letter 11 times that night. By the 12th time, the sun had come up. I opened my laptop. I filled out the re-enrollment paperwork. I sent it in at 7:31 a.m. I returned to school the following August. I had no money. I had no family. I had a one-bedroom apartment I could not afford, leftover medications from Maya's last hospitalization in the back of my refrigerator that I could not bring myself to throw away, and a small framed photograph of Maya and me at our white coat ceremony 3 years earlier that I kept on the nightstand. I took out additional loans. I picked up 2 work-study positions. I lived on cafeteria food and the leftover sandwiches from noon lecture series. I stopped buying anything I did not need. I stopped going to bars. I stopped going to anything where I would be asked to talk about my family. I graduated. Nobody from Cleveland came. Aunt Maureen drove down from Cleveland by herself in a rental car, and she sat in the 3rd row of the auditorium, and when my name was called, she stood up and cheered loud enough that the dean made eye contact with her and smiled. She gave me, after the ceremony, my grandmother Helen's silver pocket watch. She told me that my grandmother had given it to her the year before she died, with explicit instructions to pass it to me when I finished medical school. My grandmother had died during my first year. I had not been told about her death until 5 days after the funeral, because, as my Aunt Maureen would later tell me, my father had not been sure I was in the right place to attend. I matched into general surgery at Ashford Memorial Medical Center, a Level 1 trauma center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had chosen it deliberately. It was a 4.5-hour drive from Cleveland, close enough that I had not let myself be exiled, far enough that my life would not, in its day-to-day, be touched by people who shared my last name. I had drawn that line for myself in Durham, in the weeks after Maya's funeral, on a yellow legal pad. I was not going to let them push me out of my own region of the country. They had taken enough. They were not taking geography. I met Dr. Vivian Aldridge in my 2nd year of residency. She was 63 years old at the time, the longtime chief of trauma surgery at Ashford, and one of 3 women in the history of the hospital who had ever held the title. She was small, gray-haired, dryly funny, and built, as Eli would later say after the first time he met her, like a steel cable that had been wound around a small librarian. She watched me run a code on a 16-year-old gunshot wound my first month on her service. After the patient stabilized, she pulled me aside in the corridor outside the trauma bay and said, "Whitlock, you are very good. You are also very angry. In a way, you think you are hiding and that you are not actually hiding. I am going to teach you, over the next 4 years, how to keep one and lose the other. Do not embarrass me by being a slow learner." That was the beginning of the most important professional relationship of my life. I met Eli Carmichael in my 3rd year of residency at a public lecture at the Carnegie Library that I had only attended because Aunt Maureen had been visiting that weekend and had wanted to go. The lecture was about the role of public schools in immigrant communities in 20th century Pittsburgh. Eli was the moderator. He was a high school history teacher in his early 30s, dark-haired, quiet, with a slow smile that he saved for things he found genuinely funny, rather than dispensing freely. He came up to Aunt Maureen and me in the reception afterward because Aunt Maureen had asked an excellent question during the Q&A, and he had wanted to thank her for it. Aunt Maureen, who had been planning this from the moment she had read his bio in the program, introduced him to me as her surgeon niece, in tones that were not subtle. and then announced she was going to find the restroom. He took me out for coffee the next morning. We were married 15 months later. I told him my entire family story on our fourth date, sitting on a bench in Shenley Park on a cold Sunday afternoon in November. He listened to all of it without interrupting. He did not look pitying. He did not try to fix anything. When I was finished, he was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said only, "I'm sorry. Your parents missed it. They got the wrong daughter wrong. That is on them, not on you." He took my hand. We sat in silence for another 5 minutes. That was the moment I knew. The wedding was at Dr. Aldridge's farmhouse outside Pittsburgh in October, in the apple orchard at the back of her property. Eli's father, a quiet retired postal worker named Reginald, walked me down a path between 2 rows of folding chairs. 31 guests. Aunt Maureen was there. Dr. Lindquist had flown up from North Carolina. Dr. Imeda had sent flowers and a card with a single line in her handwriting that said, "Maya would be standing right behind you. I think she is." I had mailed my parents an invitation 8 weeks earlier. It had been returned to me unopened. The card itself was undamaged, but the envelope had been written on in my mother's handwriting, in blue ballpoint, in the words, "Not at this address." When Reginald, 3 days before the wedding, had asked me on the phone whether I had reconsidered inviting them, and I had told him no, he had said only, "Then I will be honored to do it. It is the second greatest honor of my life. The first is going to be raising the man you are marrying, which I have already done. So you can imagine how I feel about the second one." Vivian Aldridge gave me, after the ceremony, a small sealed envelope. She said, "Don't open this tonight. Don't open it for a long while. You will know when." I put it in a desk drawer in our bedroom, and I forgot about it for almost 4 years. The years went by. I built a life. Eli and I bought a small house in Squirrel Hill with a back garden Eli planted out himself over 4 summers. We adopted a chocolate Labrador we named Cooper, who slept across the foot of our bed and snored loudly enough to wake the dead. I made chief resident. I completed a trauma fellowship. I became an attending. 3 years ago, when Dr. Aldridge retired, she walked into my office on a Tuesday morning, closed the door behind her, sat down across from my desk and said, "Whitlock, the board has given me a retirement gift. They have allowed me to recommend my successor. The recommendation has been accepted. The position is yours, starting February 1st. I should have told you weeks ago. I have been savoring this." I had been 31 years old at the time. I had become chief of trauma surgery at Ashford Memorial Hospital, the youngest chief in the department's 41-year history. When I had finally opened the envelope she had given me at my wedding, 4 months after my appointment as chief, I had found inside it a letter of recommendation she had written, in longhand, 4 years earlier, in case the chief position ever opened up while I was still on her service. She had been preparing this since the night of my wedding. She had not told me. I cried in my office for a long time the night I read that letter. Cooper, who was at the hospital with me because Eli had been out of town, put his head on my knee and did not move until I stopped. I want to pause here for a moment. If you have ever been in a family where one person's lie was given more credibility than your truth, where the people who were supposed to know you best chose, when the moment came, to believe the worst version of you that someone else handed them, drop a fire in the comments. And if you can feel where this is going, type the word architecture. Because what my sister built over the next 7 years was not just a single lie. It was a structure. And what happens next is the part where the load it was bearing finally exceeded its design specifications. Aunt Maureen had been feeding me information about my family, very reluctantly, over the years. She did not volunteer. I had asked her, early on, not to. But every once in a while, she would mention something in passing, and over time, I built up a picture. My parents were healthy. They still lived in the house in Cleveland. My father had taken early retirement. My mother had taken up painting watercolors with what Aunt Maureen described as a slightly worrying intensity. Vanessa had married a man named Trevor Daltrey, an investment banker, in a black tie wedding at the country club in Cleveland that I had not been invited to and had learned about indirectly 3 months after it happened. Trevor had divorced her 4 years into the marriage, citing reasons that Aunt Maureen alluded to but did not elaborate. Vanessa had moved out of Chicago after the divorce. She had taken a sales job at a high-end interior design firm in Columbus, Ohio. She had been doing, by Aunt Maureen's careful phrasing, as well as could be expected, mostly. And then, in early January of this year, Aunt Maureen called me with a new and serious quality in her voice. She said, "Naomi Bear, I need to tell you something about your sister. I have been sitting on it for almost 2 years. I am not sitting on it anymore." 2 Thanksgivings ago, she said, she had confronted Vanessa at the family table, in front of our parents, with documentation she had been quietly assembling about my career. Vanessa had looked at the documentation, my Aunt Maureen said, and had laughed, a small, dismissive laugh, and had said, "Aunt Maureen, you really shouldn't be doing internet research at your age. There are a lot of people with that name. That isn't her." And my father had, in front of 7 family members at a dining room table, told my Aunt Maureen, his only sibling, that if she could not stop trying to revise the past for her own emotional reasons, she would no longer be welcome at his table. Aunt Maureen had left dinner. She had driven home to her own house in Strongsville, by herself, and she had not gone back to my parents for the next 1.5 years. She had not told me any of this, until now. She said, "Naomi, Vanessa has not stopped. Ever. She has been telling people things that are not true. I have heard her, with my own ears, tell our cousin Beth that you live in a halfway house. I have heard her tell your mother that you refused, in writing, to attend your grandfather's funeral. I have heard her tell people at the country club that she has been trying for years to reach out to you and that you have rebuffed her. None of it is true. I have been trying to make your parents see this. They have made a choice. I have to tell you now because something has shifted, and I do not yet know what to make of it." I asked her what had shifted. She said, "Last Sunday, I had brunch with your mother. Your mother had to take a phone call in the den, and I went into your father's study to look for a pen on his desk because mine had run out. There was a manila folder on the corner of his desk. It had no label on the outside. I opened it. Naomi. Inside that folder were printouts from your hospital's website. The press release about your appointment to chief. 3 of your published case studies. The faculty bio page. A photograph of you in a white coat at a conference that someone had printed off the conference website. There were dates written in pen at the top of each page in your father's handwriting. He has been collecting these. He has been collecting them for, by my count, at least 2 years. He has not shown them to your mother. He has not shown them to anyone. I did not know what to make of it. I did not have time to make anything of it. Because 17 days later, at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday in February, my pager went off. I had been asleep for 35 minutes. Eli stirred beside me. Cooper lifted his head from the foot of the bed and watched me with the patient resignation of a dog who has watched this exact sequence of events 200 times. The pager's screen glowed. Level 1 trauma activation. Single vehicle MVC. Female, late 30s. Blunt abdominal trauma. Possible pelvic injury. GCS 8. Hemodynamically unstable. ETA 9 minutes. I was dressed in 3 minutes. I was on the road in 5. I called the trauma bay from the car. The charge nurse, a woman named Marisol Reyes I had worked with for almost 5 years, said, "Naomi, we have her bay set up. She is coming in rough." I said, "Page Okafor. Tell him I want him scrubbed and ready. I want a second set of hands." Marisol did not ask why. She just said, "Copy that." Marisol does not waste words. Marisol has, more than once, saved a patient's life by saying nothing while I worked. I ran the case in my head as I drove down a wet, salt-flecked Forbes Avenue. Mechanism of injury, restrained driver, blunt abdominal trauma, dropping consciousness, falling pressure. Likely splenic injury. Possible liver involvement. Possible pelvic fracture with arterial bleeding. Standard playbook. I had done this hundreds of times. I had not, at any point in my career, done it on a family member because I had no family in the catchment area of my hospital. That is what I thought. I walked through the trauma bay doors at 11:54 p.m. The team was assembling. The patient's chart had been started by the registration clerk at the front desk and uploaded to the workstation. I picked up the tablet to read the demographics. Patient name, the screen said. Vanessa Whitlock. Date of birth, July 22nd, 1989. Next of kin, Richard Whitlock, father. Home address, the same house in Cleveland I had grown up in. I do not remember setting the tablet down. I remember, very clearly, looking up at the corner of the trauma bay where the wall meets the ceiling and counting the joints in the acoustic tile for what was probably 3 seconds and felt like a small lifetime. I have learned, over the years, to do this on the rare occasions when something inside my chest threatens to interrupt the operation of my hands. I stood very still. I counted the tiles. I waited until the tiles were just tiles. Then I turned to Marisol and I said, in the voice I have used 1,000 times for things much smaller than this, "Marisol, I need to disclose a conflict of interest. The patient is my older sister. I have not spoken to her in 7 years. I am going to operate because I am the right surgeon in this building tonight to do this case. But I want Okafor in the room. I want everything documented, and if at any point you think I am not the right person, I want you to tell me, and I will step out." Marisol nodded once. She said, "Understood, Chief. Tunde is on his way down." She did not say anything else. She did not look at me with the kind of pitying expression that would have ended me. She just turned and started gowning. I will be grateful for that until I am old. The ambulance pulled in at 11:57. 2 paramedics rolled my sister out on the board. Her face was swollen on the right side from where it had hit the steering column. Her right arm was in a temporary splint. There was a long abrasion across the right side of her neck from the seatbelt. Her shirt had been cut down the middle. Her abdomen was distended, and bruising was already spreading across the right lower quadrant in the kind of pattern that means active intra-abdominal bleeding. The paramedic at her head said, "Pressure has been bottoming. We've been pushing fluids the whole ride. She lost consciousness twice on the way in." I said, "Thank you. Let's get her to the OR. Now." And behind that ambulance, walking fast, almost running, were my parents. My father was in a winter coat thrown over his pajama shirt. My mother was in a long quilted bathrobe, She had 2 different shoes on her feet, one slipper, one loafer. They had clearly been called by the highway patrol from the scene of the accident, had thrown on the first things they could find, and had driven the 2 hours and 20 minutes from Cleveland down I-76 in the middle of the night. My father reached the triage station first. He said, in a voice that was used to being heard, "That is our daughter who just came in. Where are they taking her? I need to speak to the doctor. Get me the chief of trauma surgery, now." Marisol, who had not seen my parents and had no reason at that moment to know who they were, said, "Sir, the chief is already with your daughter. She is being taken into the OR. The chief is the surgeon on tonight. What I need you to do is come with me to the surgical family lounge. Someone will come out to update you the moment we have an update." My father, who is 6'2" and who has spent his life having his volume heard, leaned over the desk. He said, "I want to see her doctor. I want to see her doctor right now." Marisol stood up. She said, "Sir, I am the charge nurse on this floor tonight. The doctor in charge is, at this moment, washing up to operate on your daughter. You are not going to see her right now. What I can do is take you to a comfortable room where you will get the first update the moment it is available. What I cannot do is take you anywhere near the operating room." My father started to argue. My mother, behind him, put her hand on his upper arm. She said, very quietly, "Richard, stop. Please, stop." I would learn later that this was, in their 43-year marriage, the first time she had cut him off in public. He stopped. He sat down in a chair Marisol pointed him to. He held my mother's hand. They waited. In the scrub room, I gave myself exactly 40 seconds. I turned on the water. I scrubbed my hands and my forearms from fingertips to elbows, the same way I had done it 11,000 times. I caught my reflection in the polished steel above the sink. I looked at the woman in the mirror. I said to her, in my head, the only thing she needed to hear. The woman on the table is your patient. The 2 people in the lounge are her family. You are, for the next 4 hours, neither a daughter nor a sister. You are the surgeon. Operate. 4 hours and 17 minutes. That is how long the case took. Splenic rupture, complete. Splenectomy. A grade 3 liver laceration along the right lobe, repaired in 3 layers. A torn segment of small bowel mesentery with active bleeding, 2 vessels clamped and tied off. An unstable pelvic fracture that the orthopedic on call, Dr. Greta Halberg, had stabilized with an external fixator while I worked on the abdomen. 6 units of packed red cells, 3 of plasma, 2 of platelets. At 4:11 in the morning, I placed the last closing sutures. Her vitals were stable. Her urine output had come back. Her abdomen was closed. She was alive. Dr. Okafor, who had stood beside me the entire time and who had not had to say a single word, pulled his mask down. He said, in his deep, careful voice, "Whitlock, that was beautifully done. Would you like me to update the family?" I peeled my gloves off. I dropped them in the bin. I said, "Thank you, Tunde. I will do it. But thank you." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Take a moment first. Have water. You have not had water in 4 hours." I said, "I will." He nodded and walked out. I stood alone in the scrub room for a full minute. I drank a paper cup of water from the dispenser by the door. I did not cry. I checked my badge. I straightened my scrub cap. I pulled my hair back behind my ears. And then, I pushed open the door to the corridor and I walked the 35 yards down the hall to the surgical family lounge. The Surgical Family Lounge at Ashford Memorial is a square room with rows of low upholstered chairs and a flat-screen television in one corner that plays the local news on mute. At 4 in the morning in February, with the snow falling steady outside and the building silent around it, that lounge is the loneliest room in the city. I pushed open the door. The room had only one occupied set of chairs. In the corner, by the vending machines, my parents sat side by side. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was staring at her own knees. I said, "Mr. and Mrs. Whitlock?" They both looked up. The instant my father saw me, in scrubs, with my badge clipped to my collar, his face went absolutely still. He stood up about halfway out of the chair, and then he sat back down, because his legs, I think, did not commit to either direction. My mother stood up. She did not move toward me. She just stood up, with one hand on the chair behind her for balance. Her mouth opened. She did not make a sound. I said, in the voice I have used for 1,000 other families, "I'm Dr. Whitlock. I am the chief of trauma surgery here. I was the operating surgeon on your daughter's case tonight. Vanessa sustained a ruptured spleen, a moderate liver laceration, a torn mesenteric vessel, and an unstable pelvic fracture in the accident. The surgery went well. She is hemodynamically stable. She is in the surgical intensive care unit where she is being monitored. You will be able to see her in roughly 2 hours after she is settled and her vitals are reassessed. Do you have any questions about the surgery itself?" My father did not look away from my badge. He said, "Naomi." I said, "Mr. Whitlock, do you have any questions about the surgery itself?" I had called him Mr. Whitlock. I had said it the way you say it to a stranger who has just come into your hospital on the worst day of his life. I watched it land. I watched it cut. My mother sat back down. She put her hands over her face. She made a small, high, broken sound that was not quite crying. Through the glass partition that separates the lounge from the corridor outside, I could see Marisol watching. I could see 2 of the overnight nurses watching. They had figured it out. The whole night shift had figured it out sometime in the past 4 hours. Word moves through a hospital faster than blood. My father said, "Vanessa told us." He stopped. He started over. "Vanessa told us, 7 years ago, that you had been forced out of medical school. She told us. She brought documents. She said—" He could not finish. He was looking at my badge. He was looking at the embroidery on the breast pocket of my coat. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a piece of evidence that refuses to fit into the story he has been telling himself for a long time. I said, "Mr. Whitlock, I am happy to talk to you about anything you want to talk about, but not tonight. Not in this room, and not at the bedside of your other daughter. Tonight, the only thing I need you to understand is that Vanessa is alive and stable. The other conversation is going to take a long time. We do not have that time tonight. I have other patients in this hospital." My mother spoke for the first time. She said, "Naomi, we did try. We did. We tried to call you. After—" She stopped. She had heard herself. She had heard, in the act of saying it, how thin it was. She said, "I'm sorry. I am so, so sorry." I did not respond for several seconds. I had imagined this conversation in pieces over 7 years, in dark hours, when I had let myself imagine it. None of the responses I had prepared came to me. Instead, I said, very quietly, the only thing that was true. "Mom, I sent you 26 things over 9 days. I sent you the leave of absence paperwork. I sent you a letter from my dean. I sent you a photograph of my friend in the hospital bed before she died. I called 21 times. I asked Aunt Maureen to come stand in our kitchen for me. I mailed you a priority letter. It came back to me unopened in your handwriting. So when you say you tried to call me after, I just want you to sit with the word after for a minute. She did not answer. She could not. I turned to go. As I turned, Marisol opened the door from the corridor side. She had her clipboard against her chest. She said, "Dr. Whitlock, I am sorry to interrupt. The hospital president saw the trauma census this morning. He wanted me to pass on his congratulations on the case. The committee for the Vivian Aldridge Excellence in Trauma Surgery Award also confirmed that they will hold next Thursday's announcement reception. They wanted to make sure you would be in attendance." She said it the way she would have said it on any other shift. She did not know what room she had just walked into. She did not know that the award she had just named, after my mentor, named the year before for a woman who had become more of a mother to me than the woman in the housecoat 15 feet away, was the final and unrecoverable proof of what my parents had missed. My mother made the high, broken sound again. My father stood up. He did not say anything. He just stood up, in the way that men of his generation stand up when they have lost something they cannot yet name. I said, "Thank you, Marisol. Please confirm with the committee that I will be there." I walked out. I did not see Vanessa again until the next morning. She regained consciousness around 10 a.m. The ICU nurse paged me. I finished a note on another patient and walked over. I went into her room alone. The light was dim. The monitor was beeping softly. She was lying back against the pillow with her right arm in the splint and an oxygen cannula in her nose. Her hair was matted, and there was dried blood near her temple. She looked, in the dim light of the ICU, 10 years older than she was. Her eyes tracked me as I came in. They tracked my badge. They tracked back to my face. Her pupils, which had been at rest, sharpened. I said, "Good morning, Vanessa. I am your attending surgeon. You were in a single-vehicle accident last night on I-76. You sustained a ruptured spleen, a liver laceration, a torn vessel in your abdomen, and an unstable pelvic fracture. We took you to the operating room. The surgery went well. You are going to make a full recovery. The next 24 to 48 hours are the most important. We are going to be watching your vitals carefully. Are you in pain right now?" She did not answer for almost 30 seconds. She just looked at me. I have, over the course of my career, watched many, many people figure out many, many things in hospital beds. I have watched a young man understand that he had killed someone in the car he was driving. I have watched a grandmother understand that she would not be going home. I have never, before or since, watched a face do what my sister's face did in those 30 seconds. It cycled through every emotion her face had ever known: surprise, recognition, calculation, real fear. And then, finally, with what looked like an act of physical effort, it settled into the look I had grown up with, the look I had seen on her 10,000 times, the look of a woman trying to find an angle. She said, "Naomi, listen to me." I said, "Mrs. Whitlock, you don't need to say anything to me. You are my patient. That is all you are today. I am going to take care of you because I took an oath, and that is the only reason." You and I are going to have a different conversation when you are well enough to have it, and when you are not in my hospital. But today, in this room, I am not your sister. I am your surgeon. Do you understand?" She nodded. One small nod. I checked her drains. I noted her output. I made a small adjustment to her pain medication. I documented in her chart. And then I left. I did not stay for what came next. What came next was not for me. What came next, as I would later piece together from Marisol, who heard it from the ICU nurse on shift, was for my parents. They walked into Vanessa's room at 11:15 a.m. Vanessa, when they sat down, began the standard apology routine she'd been performing for years. The standard tears, the standard cracking voice, the standard pivot to the meta-narrative in which she was the one most pained by the consequences of her actions. The nurse later said it was a polished performance. It was just being performed, for the first time in 15 years, to people who were not the audience she had counted on. My father, after she had been talking for almost 3 minutes, held up his hand. He said, "Vanessa, stop. I'm not asking you whether what your sister told us 7 years ago was true. I'm telling you that I have known for at least 2 years that it was. I am asking you right now to tell me why." Vanessa, the nurse said, stopped crying. She stopped performing. She looked at my father, and then at my mother, and then at the IV in her own hand. And then she said only, "Because she was going to be everything I was not, and I could not survive that." There was no follow-up sentence. There was no qualifier. There was no plea. She said it once. My father did not respond. My mother did not respond either. They sat in the ICU room for 40 minutes more, the nurse said, and not one of them spoke. At one point, my mother stood up, walked to the side of Vanessa's bed, and tucked the blanket more carefully around her right hand, the way a mother tucks in a child she does not know whether she still recognizes. Then my mother walked out of the room and did not come back that day. Aunt Maureen arrived at the hospital at 12:30 in the afternoon with a soft leather portfolio tucked under her arm. I do not know how she had known to come. I suspect, even now, that Marisol may have called her. Marisol does not waste motion, and she does not waste people. Aunt Maureen walked into the ICU lounge where my parents were sitting in 2 chairs that did not face each other, and she said, without preamble, "Patricia, Richard, I have been carrying this for 7 years. I am not carrying it any longer." She opened the portfolio. Inside it were printed copies of every email I had sent my parents in the 9 days after Vanessa's lie. There were screenshots of my call log. There was a photocopy of the priority mail receipt for the letter that had come back. There was the leave of absence form, signed and stamped by Dr. Linkfist, dated 5 weeks before the dinner in which Vanessa had presented her false story. There was a copy of Maya's death certificate. There were photographs of me at my white coat ceremony, my residency graduation, and my wedding. There was a printed note from Reginald describing what it had been like to walk a stranger's daughter down an aisle. And at the very back of the portfolio, there was a single printout. It was a screenshot of a text message Vanessa had sent to Aunt Maureen 2 years earlier, in the spring after I had made attending. The screenshot showed the entire message. It read, "Aunt Maureen, I am begging you, stop bringing up Naomi at family events. Mom and Dad have spent years getting to a place of peace about it. You are reopening the wound. Just because you cannot let it go doesn't mean the rest of us can't move on. Aunt Maureen handed the portfolio to my mother. She said, "Patricia, read all of it. Every page. I'm going to sit here until you do." She sat down across from them. My mother read every single page. At some point during my mother's reading, my father got up and walked to the window of the lounge and stood there with his back to the room. Aunt Maureen later told me he stood at that window for almost 2.5 hours without turning around. My mother read every page. When she got to the screenshot of Vanessa's text, she set the portfolio down on her lap, and she sat very still for a long minute. And then she said, to no one in particular, in a voice my Aunt Maureen had never heard her use, "I have given the wrong child the benefit of the doubt my entire life." I came back to the ICU floor late that afternoon. My shift had ended hours earlier. I had not gone home. I had been in my office, writing notes, drinking coffee that had cooled to room temperature. My parents were still in the lounge. The portfolio was on the small table between them. They both stood up when I came in. My mother said, "Naomi, we are not asking for anything. I want to be clear about that. We just want you to know that we have read what your aunt brought. We know what we did, and we are sorry. And we know the word sorry has almost no weight here, but we wanted to be the ones to say it to you in person." I said, "I appreciate that." My father said, "Naomi, I would like, if you are ever willing, to talk to me. Not to ask anything of you, not to negotiate, just to talk. I missed 7 years of my own daughter. I would like to use whatever time I have left to make sure I do not miss any more. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you, if you ever decide it is something you want to do, to consider sitting in a room with me." His voice did the thing voices do when they are being held together by a single thread, and the thread is starting to fray. He said, "Just for an hour. That is all." I said, "I will think about it." I did not promise anything more than that. I did not feel a flood of warmth or any of the things you are supposed to feel in moments like that. What I felt was something much quieter. I felt, for the first time in 7 years, like the person in the room with the power. Not the power to punish, the power to decide. There is a difference. I had spent 7 years being decided about. Standing in that lounge, in scrubs, with my badge on, I was, finally, the one doing the deciding. That, more than anything else that happened on that very long day, was the thing that shifted. I went home. Eli was waiting. Cooper was waiting. The house was warm. Eli had made soup because Eli, who is not a man of large gestures, is a man of soup. He sat on the couch with me and did not ask any questions for almost an hour. When I started finally to talk, he listened the way he listens, which is with his entire face, the way Maya had once told me years before that you can identify a real friend. 2 weeks later, Vanessa was discharged from the hospital. I waited 5 more weeks before I contacted her. I did not contact my parents. I returned my mother's 3 messages with short, polite texts that did not commit me to anything. I let everyone, including myself, exhale. When I was ready, I emailed Vanessa and gave her the address of a small bookstore cafe in a town off I-76, halfway between Columbus and Pittsburgh. I told her the meeting would be 1 hour. I told her Eli would be sitting at a separate table in the same cafe and that this was a condition for me, not a comment on her. She agreed. She did not push back. She did not negotiate. She was already there when I arrived. When I walked in, I almost did not recognize her. She had lost a great deal of weight. The kind you lose after major abdominal surgery and then keep losing because the rest of your life has gone out from under you. She was wearing a sweater that fit her badly. Her hair was pulled back into a low ponytail without any styling. She looked, for the first time in my conscious memory, like a woman her actual age, which was 39. I sat down across from her. I did not order anything. I said, "Vanessa, we are going to do this now. We are going to do it exactly one time. I am not going to do it twice." She nodded. I said, "I want to know why. I want the full version, not the one-sentence answer you gave Dad in the ICU. The whole thing." She took a long breath. She said, "Naomi, I had been the favorite my entire life. I had built my sense of who I was on being the daughter Mom and Dad loved more. The day you got into Duke, I felt the ground move. I knew, in the moment Dad said he was proud of you, that you were going to be a doctor, and that the entire family was going to be reorganized around your achievements, and that I was going to stop being the one. I could not survive that. I could not survive being second. So I started calling you to keep tabs on you. Not because I cared, because I was looking for a vulnerability. I was looking for a thing I could turn into a story that would land. When you told me about Maya and the leave of absence, I knew in the moment. I had what I needed. The truth was complicated enough that a small modification of it would sound plausible. I sat down at my kitchen counter that night, and I drafted what I would say to Mom and Dad. I drafted it like a presentation. I edited it. I rehearsed it. I drove to Cleveland 3 days later. I told them you had been quietly removed from school for falsifying patient charts. I told them you had a boyfriend who was supplying you with pills. I told them you had been lying to them for over a year. I made it specific. I made it preempt your defense. I knew what you would say. I told them you would say it, and I made them believe me before you ever picked up the phone. She paused. She said, "I have been protecting that lie for 7 years. I called your old hospital 2 years ago, pretending to be a journalist, asking about your disciplinary record. I called the school board where Eli teaches and asked about complaints. I have done all of it, and I have not had a full night of sleep in 7 years." I did not speak for a while. When I finally did, all I said was, "Thank you for the honest version. That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me in your life." She started to cry. Not the performance kind, the other kind. The quiet kind, with her chin tucked down and her hands flat on the table. She said, "Naomi, I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking to be your sister. I am not asking to be in your life. I just need you to know that I know what I did. And I need you to know that when I woke up in your hospital, on my back, in a bed, with a tube in my arm, and I saw your name on the white coat, I understood, for the first time in 15 years, who I had actually been. You saved my life. After all of it. I do not know what to do with that, but I need you to know that I know." I said, "I took an oath. That was not for you." She said, "I know." I said, "Vanessa, here is what is going to happen now. You are going to write a letter, an email, whichever you prefer, To every member of our extended family. Aunt Maureen has the list. You are going to correct every single story you have planted about me over the last 7 years. The rehab story, the halfway house story, the story about my refusing to come to Grandpa's funeral, the story about my having abandoned the family. You are going to take all of them off the table. Specifically, by name, in writing. Aunt Maureen will confirm delivery. That is condition 1. She nodded. Condition 2. You and I are not going to become sisters in the sense that television has trained you to believe two sisters become after a thing like this. We may, eventually, become something. We are not going to be close. We are not going to call each other on birthdays. We are not going to pretend, you and I, to have a relationship we never had. If you need to reach me, you reach me for things that matter. I will respond when I am ready to respond. That is condition 2. She nodded again. Condition 3. You are going to stay in therapy. I do not need to know the details of it, but I will know whether you are going, because Aunt Maureen will know, and Aunt Maureen will tell me only that fact. Not what you talk about, just whether you show up. You are going to stay in it for years, not months. This is not a punishment. This is the only mechanism I can think of to give myself a chance of believing, eventually, that the woman who did what you did is in the process of becoming a different woman. She said, "Okay." I said, "That is what I have to say. Is there anything you want to say?" She said, "Naomi, I am sorry. I do not know what it is worth. I am sorry." I said, "It is not worth much yet. It might be worth more later. We will see what you do over the next 2 years." I stood up. I left. Eli stood up from his table and walked out behind me. I did not cry on the drive home. I cried when I got into bed that night, briefly. And then I slept for 9.5 hours, which was the longest stretch of sleep I had had in months. My parents began family counseling 6 weeks after the night in the ICU. They did not tell me. Aunt Maureen told me. They were going twice a week to a therapist in Westlake. My mother took to it. My father, by Aunt Maureen's account, sat in near silence through the first 4 sessions. On the 5th session, something broke. He had come home from that session, my Aunt Maureen said, and had gone directly to his study and had laid out every document from the manila folder on his desk in chronological order and had read them all from start to finish. My mother had brought him a sandwich at 6 o'clock. He had not eaten it. He had said only one thing to her that evening. He had said, "Patricia, I missed it. Not Vanessa. Me. I am the one who missed it." My mother, repeating this to Aunt Maureen the next day, had said that in their 43 years of marriage, my father had never taken sole ownership of a mistake without softening it. Not once. Not at the funeral of his own mother. Not once. Vanessa sent the email. 48 recipients. Aunt Maureen confirmed delivery on every one. The email was 4 short paragraphs. There were no qualifiers in it. There was no self-pity. She wrote that she had lied 7 years earlier about her sister's situation, that the lie had been intentional and constructed in advance, that she had protected and extended the lie for 7 years, that her sister had never abandoned the family, that her sister had, in fact, been the abandoned party, and that any story anyone had heard from her about her sister during those 7 years should be regarded as false. The responses came in waves. My grandmother Helen's surviving sister, my great-aunt Phyllis, age 91, called me directly the next morning from her assisted living facility in Akron. She said, "Naomi girl, I am too old to fix this, but I want you to hear me say, I never quite believed it. I should have said so. I am saying so now. Your grandmother loved you. She talked about you. She told me before she died that the watch was for you. Don't ever doubt that." I told her there was nothing to forgive. I told her I loved her. I had not said those words to anyone in my extended family in 7 years. They were not as hard to say as I had feared they would be. The award reception was on a Thursday night in early April. 250 people in a ballroom at the Carnegie Museum. I wore a long, dark green dress. Eli wore his wedding suit. Vivian Aldridge was at our table. Aunt Maureen was at our table. Dr. Okafor and his wife were at our table. The Vivian Aldridge Excellence in Trauma Surgery Award, established the year before in honor of my mentor, was presented to its first recipient that evening. I walked to the stage. I had written 4 drafts of the acceptance speech and rewritten the 4th twice. The applause was longer than I had expected. I said in the speech that 7 years earlier I had almost quit, that I had sat in a 1-bedroom apartment in Durham after the death of a friend who had no family, with no family of my own who would take my phone calls, and that I had picked up a piece of paper from her dresser that said, in slightly shaky handwriting, that blood does not make a family, but showing up does. And that those 2 sentences had carried me through the next 7 years. I said that the people who had shown up for me were the people who had made the surgeon standing on that stage. I named Vivian Aldridge. I named Eli. I named Aunt Maureen. I named Dr. Lindquist. I named Maya Becker by her full name on the record. I said that medicine, at its core, is a discipline built entirely on the act of showing up for strangers. That I had been lucky, twice over, because the strangers I had been trained to show up for had, in many cases, turned around and shown up for me, and had become, over time, less and less strange. And then I said, almost as an afterthought, that I had recently been asked to extend that same discipline of showing up to people who had not, when it counted, shown up for me. That I was not yet sure what that would look like, that I was, however, willing to find out, slowly, on my own terms. And that for anyone in this room who has been waiting for their family to see them, I had only one piece of advice. Stop waiting. Build the life that is yours. Build it under your own name. And if one day the people who did not see you find their way back to your door, do not throw the door open and do not slam it shut. Stand at it, look at them, and then decide. The decision is yours. It has always been yours. They just spent a long time hoping you would not figure that out. I sat back down. Eli held my hand under the table. Vivian leaned over and said, in my ear, "Whitlock, that was the second best speech I have ever heard you give." I said, "What was the first?" She said, "Your wedding vows." She squeezed my hand once and let go. In the very last row of the ballroom, in 2 seats Aunt Maureen had quietly arranged a week earlier without telling me, were my parents. They had asked, through her, for permission to attend. I had said yes. I had said yes because the speech I gave would have been the same speech whether they were in the room or not. And I wanted to be the kind of woman who can give the same speech regardless of who is listening. My father, my aunt later told me, did not move once during the speech. He sat with his hands flat on the tops of his thighs and his eyes on the stage. My mother cried quietly throughout. They did not approach me at the reception afterward. They'd agreed, with my aunt, that the evening was not for them. They left before the dessert course was served. My father had stopped in the lobby on the way out and asked my aunt to pass along one message. He had said, "Tell her I came, and tell her she does not have to do anything with that information." It is May now. The maple in our front yard has come into full leaf. The afternoons are warm. Eli is in the back garden, trying to coax 3 tomato plants into producing more than 2 tomatoes between them. Cooper is asleep on the tile of the kitchen floor, where it is coolest. I am writing this in my home office, where my grandmother Helen's silver pocket watch sits on the corner of my desk in a small wooden tray, next to the framed letter from Maya, next to a third item that arrived in the mail 2 weeks ago. The third item is a photograph. It came in a manila envelope with no return address on the outside, but I recognize the handwriting on the inside flap. It is a photograph of me at age 11, standing in the parking lot of the convention center downtown, holding the Regional Science Fair trophy. My grandmother is in the picture with me. I am holding the carnations in my other hand. I had not known anyone had taken this photograph. It must have been my father, from across the parking lot, before he had pulled forward into the loading zone. He had taken it without getting out of the car. He had taken it without telling me. On the back, in my father's handwriting in pencil, are 6 words. They say, "Atrial fibrillation. The signals get lost." I have been carrying this picture in my wallet for 23 years. I should have showed it to you a long time ago. I am showing it to you now. I have not replied to it yet. I will. I have not decided what form the reply will take. Maybe a letter. Maybe a phone call. Maybe a 1-hour invitation to a coffee shop halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, the way I sat with Vanessa. I have not decided. I have, for the first time in a very long time to decide. If you have been watching this, and any of what I have told you has felt familiar, I want you to hear one thing before I let you go. The truth does not expire. It does not matter if it has taken 7 days or 7 years or 30. The truth has a long patience to it. It waits. It is, very often, the last thing left standing in the room when everything else has worn itself out. And when it finally speaks, it does not have to be loud. It just has to be the thing that has not gone away. I did not get revenge on my sister. I never wanted revenge. I became a person who did not need it. I built a life that did not require my parents' permission. I let the truth come on its own timeline, and when it came in a trauma bay at midnight, on the worst night of my sister's life, on the most ordinary night of mine. It did not come because I had summoned it. It came because I had spent 7 years showing up, in a surgical residency, in a fellowship, in an attending position, at the bedsides of strangers at 3 a.m. I had built, brick by brick, the kind of life in which the truth eventually had a place to land. If you are waiting for your family to see you, please, please do not wait. See yourself. Build the life that is yours. Pick the people who choose you back. Eat dinner at their tables. Mark your holidays with them. Bury your dead with them. And if one day the people who did not pick you find their way back to the edge of that life and stand at the door, do not throw it open and do not lock it. Stand at it. Look at them. Take whatever time you need to take. And then decide. The decision was always yours. They simply spent a very long time hoping you would not realize that. My name is Dr. Naomi Whitlock. I am 34 years old. I am the chief of trauma surgery at Ashford Memorial Hospital in Pittsburgh. I am married to a man who chose me. I am the niece of a woman who never stopped fighting for me. I am the student of a mentor who wrote my recommendation 4 years before the position existed. I am the grateful keeper of a letter from a friend who died too young to see what her 2 sentences did to my life. And I am, slowly, carefully, on a timeline I am writing myself, beginning to consider becoming, again, somebody's daughter. Not the daughter they planned on, the daughter I actually am, which is, as it turns out, the only one I was ever going to be. There is a photograph on my desk of a girl with a trophy in one hand and a small bouquet of carnations in the other. The girl in the photograph did not know, the afternoon it was taken, that anyone was watching from across the parking lot. She thought she was alone. It turned out she was not. It just took 23 years for the person watching to admit it. I am not sure yet what to do with that, but I have, for the first time in my life, the rest of my life, to figure it out.